All right, so this is, again, welcome to maybe whoever joined next. This is still stage data security and cloud. My name is David Schönwert. I'm the policy officer for data economy at Bitkom. Well, I'm getting a message in the second that we're still waiting for our next speaker, who's going to talk about international data transfer with Google Cloud. And I think until he arrives, we will just maybe have 2 minutes to again wait until he manages to join us here on stage 2, data security and cloud. I do think that I saw him earlier already. So let me see if he is here. It doesn't seem to be. Yes, but I see him here. I hope, yeah, there you go. Wonderful. Jacek, Lagoni, hi, great to see you. No worries. I think there was a minor technical glitch. Maybe that's why you were not here, but we'll be cutting all of this later anyway, so there will be absolutely no problem with your talk. Jacek, thank you so much for being with us. Jacek, I understand, Jacek, Dr. Lagoni, you're an associate legal counsel with Google, and you're going to be talking about international data transfer with the Google Cloud. And if there's time at the end of your talk, we'll also try to have a short Q&A session. So if anybody has a question during his intervention, feel free to put it into the chat. Else, I also have some backup questions. Jacek, over to you. Welcome.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much for the introduction. Just for the record, it's quite difficult. My first name is Polish. It's Jacek, but never mind. It's maybe quite difficult no problem for non-Polish tongues. I would like to present something. May I do that by sharing my screen? Yeah. So I will try. Yeah. Chrome tab. Go.
Wonderful. I can see your screen. But you are muted right now, still.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Perfect. I will try to now go to my presenting screen, and I hope the microphone will not vanish. Can you hear me now still?
Yes, this is all good.
Can you hear me? Perfect. So without further ado, welcome. I will speak about, I was already introduced, so I don't need to do this myself. I will speak about international data transfers with Google Cloud. And this presentation consists of 4 parts. First, I will talk about the old setup we had before the implementation of the Schrems 2 decision. Then, of course, the key part is how we do things with the new SDCs. After that, I will shed some light on the additional safeguards we offer to customers. And the final point, I will have some outlook of what might be ahead of us. So first of all, to set the scene and to have you more dive into what we are here, I would like to explain the contractual structure that we have here in Google Cloud for our infrastructure platform or software as a service. It's more or less the same. I simplified it a little bit, so please don't take this too hard. So we have on the one hand side the customer based in the EU, and the customer has a commercial agreement, the blue arrow, with the Google Cloud entity also in the EU. Here we have at Google Cloud a local to local or regional to regional structure, as you may. So The two also have a data processing agreement, here the yellow arrow, that contains the instructions from the customer to Google Cloud, as well as the security measures that we apply to the customer data. And the customer data's flow is from the customer to Google Cloud, indicated by the gray arrow. So far, so simple. Next slide is this one. So back in the days when we only had, besides the privacy shield, which was later invalidated, the old standard contractual clauses, there were two modules, as most of you may know, the controller to controller module, so controller in the EEA, controller outside the EEA, and C2P controller inside the EEA, processor outside the EEA, to guarantee or ensure an adequate level of data protection, also if the data goes outside the EEA. As widely criticized in the data protection community, these models were not enough to reflect all the constellations that there might be. However, over 10 years ago, this was more or less okay. And this more or less okay, we tried to reflect also in our contractual setup, which was at times a bit cumbersome. So, as on the slide, on one of the first slides, you can see it on the one part of here, we have the customer, same symbol now, also called the data exporter, and the customer in the EU has this contract about provision of cloud services with the Google Cloud entity in the EU. Blue arrow commercial agreement, yellow arrow data processing agreement, and the customer data goes first to the entity of Google's in the EU, and then, let's say, for some service maintenance request by the customer outside the usual business hours to an entity outside the EU, here in this example, Google LLC in the US. And the customer and the Google US entity have this green agreement of kinds, which had this agreement of some kind, which are the old SCCs with the controller to processor setup. We don't have to go too much into the details, but as you can see, probably also on the first glance, there is some kind of disparity between the contractual setup and how actually the customer data flow is in practice. Furthermore, you can also criticize that, well, not always is the customer the controller of the data that this entity has, but it may also be the processor itself and give this data to further processors by another processor, and so on and so forth. So these were quite problematic constellations, and we tried to address them with cross-references, complicated terms like third-party beneficiary clauses, and so on and so forth. And furthermore, as the old SCCs were quite old indeed, and in between, after a few years, the GDPR was introduced, we also had to contact the supervisory authorities, or we don't had to, but we did, and there was some procedure to evaluate whether the setup as it was still okay with the new regulation. And well, we had lots of official statements about that, which we also made public. And all this, as you can see from me sweating now, was quite a cumbersome exercise in my daily life, which is negotiations with customers. And I must confess, it was quite difficult to wrap one's head around all this. However, it was not all our fault. We just had two modules and we had to cope with it. And now a new day has come, new standard contractual clauses. We have more modules now. You can see them in this yellow area. So in addition, we have the processor to processor SCCs and the processor to controller SCCs. In particular, the P2P SCCs were something that the data protection community, in particular the lawyers among us, craved for. And I will now show you what we did with that. So here we have the same constellation as before, customer and VU, contracts with the Google entity in VU. You already know blue and yellow arrow, yeah, and the customer data flows in the same way. However, here we have the SCCs in green between the Google entity in VU, that is now the data exporter, and the Google entity in the US, which is still the importer. However, as the data, well, the entity in the middle is actually a processor of the data, this P2P setup better reflects this aspect and also better addresses from a legal standpoint how the data flows on the practical side of things. So this is easier. However, not everything is easier, so let me go to this slide. I want to explain two constellations which we also are able now to address with the modules we have at hand. So this is a case where the customer is based outside the EEA, but still due to this local to local or regional to regional sales setup, contracts with the entity or our entity in the EU, as you can see, blue and yellow arrow with the South African customer. The data, this data from South Africa, let's assume all data from South African citizens flows to the EU, and with the moment that this data virtually touches EU soil, it becomes subject to the GDPR. You can read it in Article 3. And so when Google does something with this data in the EU, as instructed by the South African entity, and sends this data back by because the customer wants it back and wants it stored somewhere and do something in South Africa with it, we need to secure this data transfer with P2C SCCs, and we do that. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the same that we had on the slide before. So this seems maybe not total logic at first, but from a legal perspective, it's a safe way to do it, and we do this as we have the modules now at hand. Next slide is another constellation which may be a bit difficult to understand for laymen, and also from a legal perspective, it's not the norm. So we have two entities in the US. The customer is based in the US and contracts with its local provider in the US, here Google LLC, and the data that the customer has in its files and its storage is not all from US American citizens, but also, as indicated here by the symbols and files, from people, from EU people, EU citizens. So the data subjects are subject to GDPR, as GDPR also states. And due to this extraterritorial applicability of the GDPR, even in such constellations totally or geographically quite far away from Europe, we have to implement, at least it's our point of view, we have to implement the SCCs, and we offer here SCCs between the customer and Google LLC. It's the C2P setup. You can, of course, also think about the P2P setup in certain constellations. However, the customer data that we receive, it's not something that we scan for EU citizens, non-EU citizens, and so on and so forth. It's we don't have the right to do that, and we don't do it. It's more like containers in the port, like a black box. So the container comes in, customer name is on it, and we ship it from location A to B as told by the customer. And what is inside, we give the customer the possibility to indicate in such cases where the customers are not in EMEA, like this example, or this, like this example in particular, and ask them to indicate whether EU data is processed, and they can do so by clicking in, let's say, administrative console of Google Cloud that helps to administer all operations of the customers. And here they can do it, and by that we know customer needs SCCs, and we provide this, and everything is settled from a legal point of view. So now let's go to the more, let's say, less legal topics, additional safeguards. I divided this into 3 buckets. We have, like the EDPB as well, the technical, the organizational, and the contractual ones. The most important ones for us, as also for the EDPB, are the technical ones. Here, in particular, encryption, I will talk about it in a bit, and also different kinds of access controls. I highlighted 2 aspects here. It's access transparency, a tool that makes transparent, visible, it's like a log file system, which kind of access there has been regarding certain data. And key access justification, which is a tool with which the customer can deny or grant access from us or from others to their data, and also imply policies to do that, and so on and so forth. The other ones, I will talk about it as well. So organizational, in particular, contractual. As you saw, we have the DPA in place, and also the SCCs and some kind of addenda. So let's go to the technical ones. Here, I will explain on a high level, and not a, I'm just a legal counsel, how encryption works. So we have encryption by default, and the customer can choose, can bring his own encryption keys, can engage a third party that encrypts the data. Everything is possible. But if the customer does nothing, the data is encrypted by us in transit and at rest. And this works more or less like that. So on the outskirts of this cloud, on the left-hand side, from my perspective, you have this blue kind of thing, which is the data that the customer introduced. And then in the cloud, a process starts, which I described here, and my colleagues as well, as chunked and wrapped. So this piece of data is chunked into pieces, and each piece of data is encrypted by a key, then wrapped with another layer, and then encrypted again. And these little pieces, chunked and wrapped data, are then distributed throughout the cloud, which makes it much harder for attackers to identify a certain part of the data and then do bad things with it. So it's actually quite a secure way to treat the data. Then on the technical side, the customer has also the possibility to choose where the data shall be when they work with it, in particular at rest. So they can choose between different continents. And here on this slide, I just showed which service, because there are lots of sub-services in Google Cloud, can be stored in which region, in which data center there. This is just an excerpt. It's quite a long list, and even with low carbon in Zurich, as you can see. Here, this is the transparent, this organizational part. So we have blogs. So we talk a lot, we communicate a lot about what we do. We have white papers. Some of you might say, well, this white paper thing, it's worth nothing. Well, but if you look at inside it, there can be quite comprehensive and in-depth information, in particular for people from the technical side. So we have to offer a lot here, and from my experience from negotiations with big enterprises, there's quite significant information in these white papers. We also have transparency reports, which outline which governmental access requests we got, and we of course have a TIA, and we share the results with customers on request as well. We have also some Google privacy principles. It's quite let's say, obvious but we don't do these things. However, as we are Google, and some people have, let's say, different views about us, we have to say such things like, we never sell your data. Well, we have agreements, we honor these agreements, and we also only do with the data as instructed by the customers. And speaking about agreements, the data processing and security terms of the data processing agreements we have in place cover the instructions about processing of customer data. They cover the TOMs. We have lots of audits of international, according to international standards, and other valuable sections about stuff we do. And with regards to the TOMs, we also adhere to the EU Cloud Code of Conduct, which shows that the TOMs we have are okay with Article 28, paragraph 5 of the GDPR, which may also be worthwhile to look at. Here are some reports we do. So, of course, different ISO, SOX, even BSI C5, all of which need a lot of resources, but we do that, we invest that, and also because of that, I think we have quite a strong footprint, or let's say a good rapport with some FinServ customers that that need to have these audits in place. Now to the outlook. So hopefully it will not end up as this rather pessimistic picture shows, with EU-based and of course bred pigeons that transport pen drives from one entity to another. Hopefully it will be something else. So I think more or less there are three aspects that we see at the horizon. This Privacy Shield 2.0, which has a different name now, will probably have a different one. I think there was some news in Politico 2 days ago, and we will hear some speakers about this as well. So hopefully this will come into place, and there will be more rights for citizens of US and EU, in particular with regards to redress, to have a uniform structure for data transfers. So we don't have to do this kind of focus sessions anymore. But let's see. As you can see from the dates of these articles, this Privacy Shield has been coming for 2 years now, but as it seems, it will be in place soon. Another possible solution may be Gaia X, which is, in a nutshell, I'm not involved in it, but there are lots of European enterprises that are. It's creating a hyperscaler in Europe. They are quite well funded. However, to create such a big infrastructure as a hyperscaler usually has, it may require even more money. And let's see where this will go. And a third aspect, which I'm more familiar with, is sovereign cloud, which takes a bit of a different view compared to Gaia X. It's not creating a hyperscaler in the EU. It's rather taking a hyperscaler and making it fit more to the EU standards and the sovereign data location requirements by partnering up with a local entity. And there are different models. We also, I think, ForgeRock hinted about something about sovereign cloud. In our model, this works here in Germany with T-Systems, our partner. We also have something in Thales where there are specific regulations about that as well. And this sovereign controls by T-Systems, the sovereign cloud, is actually more additional safeguards about data residency, external key management, also some kind of administration by T-Systems of our co-administration of our infrastructure, and of course local support by EU-only personnel. This is in a nutshell what the sovereign cloud may look like. And now I think I'm more or less due and happy to answer questions in the remaining 5 minutes or so. So thank you very much for your attention.
Jacek, thank you so much. This was super interesting. Thank you for your insights so far. Let me ask the audience again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat now. I will read them out to Jacek. In the meantime, yes, feel free to have a glass of water. Because I was also thinking, Jacek, you mentioned the Schrems 2. You mentioned the Schrems 2 ruling. Maybe in a nutshell, how do you say from your perspective, how did the cloud market change? How did the questions from customers, for example, change after the Schrems 2 ruling?
Yeah, it's quite difficult situation. I think you realize it also at conferences like this one or others I've been at. So on the one hand, if you look at Schrems quite narrowly, you might think, oh my gosh, will I ever be able to write an email? Yeah. And on the other hand, we all live in a very connected world where it's quite difficult to restrict to certain states, regions, and so on. So I think in a kind of way, the factual side of things also creates how we interpret norms. So it's like if there is a, let's say, I will not say a red light at the traffic lights, but rather something yellow, and people go over the street, you will go over the street and it will be okay. And I think maybe it's a bit like that we are in a kind of gray area. Of course, we feel some kind of uncertainty with customers, and what we can do is we have very big resources at hand, so we try to create as much transparency as possible and show the customer what there is from the technical side, but also help them assess the actual risks. So if you look how many governmental access requests there are from United States or other countries with regards to enterprise customers, it's very little. So it's not typically that they say, oh, I want the data of XYZ enterprise. It's rather of certain terroristic actors and so on and so forth. Plus, we of course also show in which way we address these requests and how we defend the rights of our customers, which is in the way we can do, I think, quite robust. So I think the discussion changed a bit. We are more in depth, a bit of uncertainty, but in the end, it's still okay, I think. In particular, after the SCCs, the new SCCs have been introduced, I think this created a better working environment for commercial counsels.
I see. I think it's super interesting also, since it's such a kind of evolving, ongoing discussion. Also, then maybe just I have to ask this follow-up question now. There's talks about the new privacy shield, and there was also something in the news very recently. To the extent that you're allowed to say something about maybe what you or Google Cloud, what you expect from kind of the future privacy shield as it is being rumored.
Yeah, of course it would be. Yeah, I at least tried to point at it in my presentation as well. I read this political article. First, it will probably take more or less half a year until everything is wrapped. Hopefully, it will start this week. But they announce something. It would be great, of course. But let's say we try to not only focus on one aspect like privacy shield. We also have the SCCs, so we do the most we can do legal-wise, and we also applied for binding corporate rules. This takes a long time, but just preparing this and setting up the structure is quite a heavy lifting, as I know from quite direct perspective. So we not only trust in, we don't put our eggs in one bucket. But still, it would be, of course, the best outcome if there would be more rights to citizens in EU or US, and there would be, let's say, both parties would look more eye to eye, and we would be in a freer world in this regard as well.
Yes, I think we're all kind of waiting and like looking at it with a lot of excitement to see how this continues. Maybe I would have time for just one last question, which goes a bit into that direction. But because you spoke about different also the measures that you're currently using. You talked about SECs, and you just mentioned writing corporate rules as something that you're looking into working on. Is there like maybe also more generally? It's like what is the most important measure kind of to secure data transfers? Is that even something you can say, or is it just it has to be this kind of collection of different approaches?
I think I think ideally it's actually a collection. So if I would be a customer, I would, of course, as VDPB asked me to, I would look what data do I have, which kind of standard do I need. But if I had to pick one, I would say encryption is very important. It's the most is of course difficult to say for a lawyer, but from my perspective, what customers look most at is the encryption part, because it not only serves Schrems 2, but actually what we sometimes tend to forget because of this legal aspect, and I want to comply with Schrems 2, is what actually happens on the security side. And this is a danger. Of course, it's maybe bad if I get a letter from a supervisory authority and have to write something back, but if some criminal player accesses my data, it's far worse. So people are very much looking into the encryption side of things and doing a lot here. And I would say this is very important, but as you said, it's a bucket. And you cannot only say I do encryption, everything is fine, because as in data protection, you have to think quite widely. You have to differentiate which kind of data, where do I put it? Do I put it at all in the clouds, or do I put it also somewhere else, and so on and so forth. But if I had to pick one, I would say, let's start with encryption and then go to the rest.
All right, got it. Thank you so much.